Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Writers Tribe Talk Show. It's another Spotlight Author episode. Today's guest is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to talk to him. One of my favorite things about doing this show is talking to other authors because I get to learn about different genres that I don't write in or just don't know enough about. And I get to build my reading list, my to be read list, from these. So it's really, really fun and exciting. Today's episode is no exception to that rule. I'm looking forward to it, and I think you're going to enjoy it too. So we'll be back with a special guest. His name is Adam Gaffen, and he's the author of the Cassidy Chronicles. Hey guys, as promised, I have Adam Gaffen, the author of the Cassidy Chronicles, and I'm really excited to hear about these stories because they look so cool. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So right off the bat, I have to tell you, and I told you this in email already, but I want everybody else to go and check this out right away after the interview, though, not while you're watching the video. Check out Adam's website. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's just insane. Tell me a little bit about the website.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Mallory Cooper of the Writing Wives did the redesign on the website and migrated it from WordPress over to Wix, and did all the things and set it all up. And it's really, it's so easy to use as an author who's kind of tech savvy, but not all the way. I mean, I can't write code. So, but it's all plug and play. Plug and play, drag and drop, you can move things around. And she just set it up beautifully, and you've seen it.
Yes.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I'm thrilled.
And I think authors who don't have websites are really missing out on a great opportunity, because that is such a great landing spot to send your readers and followers for everything. I mean, your website has all such useful tabs that take you right to where you want to go, get you the information that you want, nice and easy. And it's so well done, so well done. But so now tell me how the Chronicles even came about, because this is really, really epic. I mean, this is an epic, Chronicles, that gives it away right there, right?
Right.
But tell me how you came up with the idea, first off.
Originally, it was going to be 4 novellas. And I had the first scene in my head. The first scene of the first book opens at the wedding of Aiyana, Kendra, and Derek. And an assassin tries to kill Aiyana. She's the only one who sees it and tried to do it. And she takes off running with the other 2. So I had that whole scene all worked out. And then after I wrote that out, I'm like, well, who are these people? So that's what the next chapter is, explaining who they are. And then, all right, what are they doing next? And it just built from there. And I got the first 2 novellas done back in 2012 and released into 2013, and started on the 3rd one. And then life happened and I stopped. Advice to aspiring writers: don't stop.
Yes.
It is so much harder to start writing again than it is just to work through, keep pushing through something. And so when I finally picked it up again in early 2020, I finally knew at that point who the big bad was, and was able to finish the story. And it was only supposed to be the one story. It was only supposed to be, these people, and tell the story. And there was a nice little epilogue telling what happened afterwards, because I hate when authors do that. They write a book and it's like, okay, and it ends. If they wrote a good book, you care about the characters.
Yes.
You want to know what happens next. And if you're not going to write more in that series, then you need to give the the readers something, a little something that they can say, oh, okay, and they can fill in the details with their imagination. But then I started writing another book, and it just wasn't working. So I put that book into their universe, and suddenly it worked. Suddenly all the pieces fell into place, and that's where the series really took off. That second book is The Road to the Stars, and it's really where Kendra, who is the young lady in the black suit behind me, and she also does a lot of the writing on the blog and has her own book out and a couple stories in the upcoming collection. She's quite the character. That's where she really starts coming into her own, because she's the dreamer. She has the big dreams. So there are 5 novels now. There's one memoir written by Kendra, which tells of her childhood with Aiyana. They grew up together. And then the collection coming out, and there are more books in another branch, which will start coming out in June.
I love what you've done with this series and with these characters. Now, I noticed that you have the blog post, and of course, this is, they've taken on their own life, and every author of fiction is just sitting here, when they watch us, they're going to be nodding their head, because we all understand, like they run the show. We're just the conduit, and they run the show. They tell us what to write. They tell us what's going to happen, and we just go along for the ride and do what they tell us to do, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's their stories. We just write down the words.
Yes.
One of the things I've said in an author bio is, depending on who you ask, I'm either the creator of the Cassidy Chronicles or Kendra's biographer.
I love that. I love that. And it's, you just did such great character development with this, and you give them, and you hit on something really important. Readers want to know what happens to these people, like after the story, after we read the book. We want to know what happened in their lives, because you get so invested in these characters. You're saying that you took that long pause in between the stories because life happened. And how hard was it getting back into the stories? Because I'm struggling with that right now. So I need your advice. How did you get yourself back in that headspace, or did it come naturally?
I won't say it came naturally. It was more circumstantial, because at the end of 2019, towards the end of 2019, the company I was working for decided to eliminate my position. Okay, not a good thing in any other circumstance. However, it did provide me time. So, and then we get into 2020, and COVID is happening, and things are shutting down, and it provided me the time and opportunity to start thinking about what I had been writing, and looking over what was there, and finally figuring out, like I said, who the big bad was, because there were a couple of characters in there which were kind of the mid-level bad guys, the middle manager bad guys. They're directing their henchmen to go do this, go do that. And there's a connection between the two, but neither of them have enough juice to do everything that's going on. So there had to be somebody pulling the strings behind them. And I'm depending on how you want to call it, I'm either a pantser or a discoverer. I find the story out pretty much as I'm writing it. I might have an idea of where I want the story to end, although that doesn't always hold true. But I can get back to that in a bit. So I didn't know who the connection was. What made this make sense? And then finally I did. And so everything came together. It's like, okay, the idea, the time, all right, let's get this done. So I got it done, and then pretty much haven't stopped on it since.
That's amazing. Yeah, not to make light of the pandemic and COVID in any way, but for us authors and writers, boy, oh boy, was it was it helpful? Where else are you going to go? What else are you going to do but sit there and write? And yeah, I think a lot of writers can relate to that very easily. Tell me something. Now, can you, I don't know if you can say this, your characters might be listening, but do you have a favorite character in there? Like, is there one? Of course, there's always a main character, but is there one that really, really speaks to you?
So one of the characters, I really like her because this goes back to being a discoverer of the story. So in the second through fifth books, it goes out into space. It really gets into the science fiction as opposed to a thriller set 100 years from now. And the pilots, so if you know anything about current military, pilots always have a handle. They always have a nickname. Think of Top Gun, and he was called Maverick.
Right.
And you had Iceman and Goose. They weren't their names, they were their handles. So all the pilots that start getting introduced in the second book all have handles. Now, I've got to do a little bit of a deep dive here. Mm-hmm. So the ships that they're piloting are they're shuttles. They're 30 meters long, and they're the workhorse. They go ground to atmosphere to space and back, and they can handle anything. They're tough little ships. They're designed to haul stuff back and forth, but they have a pilot and an engineer. They have to have one. The pilot flies it and the engineer makes sure that the fusion reactor doesn't blow up. And it requires specialized training. A pilot trains to be a pilot. An engineer trains to be an engineer. Now they're both cross-trained, so a pilot could manage the engineering for a little while, the basic functions. They're not going to know all the emergency stuff, but if everything's going okay, they can deal, and vice versa. So I had somebody, a reader, say, "Oh, I'd love to be in one of the books." Great. I do that all the time. I love having people say, "I want to be in one of your books, use my name." Well, she had this great name, Brianna Justina Daniela Garcia.
Oh, that
I was
is
like, "Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It's a fabulous name." And I'm like, this name is too good to use on one character. So guess what? You're now triplets. So there's Brianna, Justina, and Daniela.
Brilliant.
So Brianna and Justina. Brianna is Batgirl. Justina is Junkyard. Brianna is a pilot. Justina is an engineer. Their sister Daniela is called Double Dip because she's a pilot and an engineer. She was fully cross-trained in both. The only person in the fleet who is. So she got written in as Double Dip with those characteristics because I thought, oh, that's a cool nickname. That's a cool handle. I want to use Double Dip for a character. So that's why she existed. In the third book, I introduced fighters, one-man ships, one-person ships. And if it's one person, they have to be able to pilot and engineer at the same time. They have to maintain the engineering systems. So guess who is the lead test pilot for this new class of ships, the Dire Wolves? That's right, it's Double Dip. And so, and because she's the first, she becomes the senior instructor pilot, the first squadron commander. I mean, she's the one who moves up the ranks fastest because she's the first one, and she becomes more and more important as the series goes on. So it's just fascinating to me how she has evolved from this little one-liner character to a fairly major secondary character, so much so that she's actually the focus of one of the stories in the collection, and she is one of two main characters in another story in that collection. This again from having a clever nickname. So
that's incredible. I love that. I love the evolution of a character like that. And my God, there's no end to where you can go with this series. Do you foresee an end to the series anytime soon? Like, do you know in your mind where and how it's going to end, or is that just too much to even contemplate right now? There's so much you can do, so it's hard, I would imagine.
Oh, there is a lot that can be done. So the branch series I was talking about. So at the end of the 5th book, Kendra is talking about building these massive spaceships, 2 kilometers long, and sending them out to explore for years on end. So a self-contained, a flying city. So the branch takes place a few years later, and they've actually started building these things, and now they're even bigger. They're 4 kilometers long. And the mission is supposed to last for 3 years, and they're supposed to go out thousands upon thousands of light years. So that's the series that's starting up. And as I was writing the first book, there was this minor little incident that I was using to, all right, so these are big spaceships with 4,000 people, and they're in deep space. They're cut off from anybody else, right? So these 4,000 people are the only people you're going to see for the next 3 years, which leads to a lot of you can do a lot of psychological exploration about, humans in pressure and, seeing the same person day after day after day after day. And so, there's going to be conflicts. And I introduced this a rogue planet that a junior officer has discovered. And it annoys her, her supervisor, because she's the one who discovered it, not him. And I just put it in there for that psychological, create that clash a bit more. Turns out the rogue planet is actually really important. Had no idea. Had absolutely no idea. It completely changed the direction of the series.
And when you realized it, didn't you just want to shout it out to everybody, like, see what happened? Look what happened, right? Because it's so exciting, especially, if you're a pantser, which, by the way, I want to talk about that a little bit, because you blew my mind when you said that you were a pantser, because I was so sure you were going to say you were a plotter, just based on the complexity and depth and character development. So you totally shocked me with that. But oh my God, yeah. There has to be some plotting, right? No? I mean, you really, I'm a pantser, but I write pretty easy stuff. There's no galaxies and all of the things that go into your stories, and the intricacies, and just the technical stuff with the spacecrafts and the engineering, and all of the things that you have to have at least some understanding of. I mean, you could say anything. You could make up, words and tell me those are actual, mechanical terms, and I'd be like, okay, cool, But I know your readers, because readers are very loyal to their genres. They're so sure of everything. They probably would call you out. If you write historical fiction, if you make a mistake in there, the readers will call you right out on it. And I would imagine for science fiction, it's probably the same, right?
It certainly can be. You have to, unless you start writing, and unless you intend to start writing, space fantasy, which is, well, let's face it, Star Wars. Nothing against Star Wars. I enjoy many of the movies, but it's fantasy. There's no conceivable law of physics which can account for a lightsaber. None.
Right.
So if you're writing science fiction, then you have to base it on stuff which is you base it on reality, you expand that to what might be, and then you stretch it to, okay, if that could be, then where does logic take us? What could be? And so as long as you have that firm foundation and everything is logical and everything makes sense, and you can explain things so that it's all rational within within the universe that you've created, then absolutely your readers are going to come along for the ride. But you have to be consistent. This is why I have a whole document which is just technical stuff for me, so that I can keep track of what I'm doing, on a book-to-book basis. And writing them quickly actually helped keep them in my head, because I knew, okay, this is where the character is, this is who they're interacting with. And having the minor characters float in and out wasn't too bad, as long as I could keep track of what the major characters were doing and feeling, and what their story arcs were.
Sure. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Oh, it's so exciting. I I love everything about it. And this is actually quite an education too, because I'm glad I got corrected before I made the mistake of saying, implying that this was like sci-fi fantasy or anything like that. It's not fantasy. Straightforward sci-fi, right? Is dystopian a fair term to use in this genre as well, or not so much?
Not so much. And
Okay.
I'm going to throw, before I address that, I have a cat staring at me from on top of my desk. So if I glance up there every now and again, because I'm trying to make sure she doesn't jump.
Listen, it'll be a great interview if he jumps out and
It will. It'll get very exciting very quickly. So Arthur C. Clarke has had a quote, which was, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." So you can include magical elements in a hard science fiction story, as long as it's coming from a place where that technology is so evolved that the people perceiving it can't understand it.
I like
somebody
that.
Somebody from 1850 looking at what we're doing here now would swear it's witchcraft. And
That's a great point. Yeah.
they wouldn't, by their standards, they wouldn't be wrong. So who's to say what 200 years from now it's going to be? All right, so I started off in 2113, and my supposition at that point is that the United States has fragmented into a dozen different countries. But that doesn't make it dystopian. The wars that have happened as these countries have formed and reformed and declared independence and have been minor. They've been skirmishes. They're not World War scales. They're not, lobbing nuclear weapons at each other scales. They're not devastating, civilian population scale. It's really limited warfare, and it's between, I think one example is the Northern Imperium. It's the former states of, let's see, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. And it breaks off from the United States in 2140, and there's a war. But for the rest of the country, or the countries, it doesn't affect them, because they're not necessarily taking sides one way or another. It's okay, yeah, you guys squabble it out. So life goes on for most of the people on the continent. And so technology keeps going, and society keeps going and evolving. And it still manages to remain fairly cohesive, in that they all have a shared, cultural heritage. And they're starting to diverge, but it's only a century down the road. So the divergence isn't bad, and it's fairly similar to what we have now. Just occasionally you have to show your passport when you're going over a border instead of just driving through. So no, not dystopian, not utopian either, because it's not. It is by no means a perfect world. I mean, they're all, as long as there are humans, it's not going to be perfect. Humans are inherently flawed.
Yes.
And we all have, there's always going to be a conflict of interest between group A and group B over something.
Right. Very true. Well said. That is so true. So accurate. I love that. Now tell me about this stunning background you have there. This is the next in line, right? For the series, for the Chronicles?
Yes. When you write 5 novels, which total about 600,000 words, despite the fact that there is an awful lot in there, there's even more that's unsaid. There has to be,
Right.
because if you look in the back of the 5th book, there is a cast of characters in there which is 10 pages long. All of those people, all those characters have stories, most of which are never going to get told.
Mhm.
So with Into the Black, I wrote 11. Okay, fine. Sorry, Kendra's yelling at me. I wrote 9 stories. She wrote 2, which fill in some of the gaps. The first one, there's one in there called Recruiting Kendra, which she wrote. She, after high school, she went out to the California Confederacy and she became an actress, pursuing her dream. She wants to be an actress. She got in over her head and she got recruited by a company called Outlook, who paid off her debts. And in return, they trained her to be a courier. And it's not a courier like FedEx or UPS. They give her a package and the package gets through no matter what. So she has to learn how to infiltrate. She has to learn how to sneak across borders, break her way through borders if she has to. The package goes through. And so there's a 35,000 word novella in there that Kendra wrote called Recruiting Kendra, which tells that story, how she went from being an actress to being a courier. Because that's a huge thing in the very first book. The fact that, she is a courier who's been trained to do all these things and to move through society, saves their lives. There are other stories set later. One of the things in the 5th book, Kendra just very casually tosses off to an AI. Of course you have a soul. Of course in her Terran Federation, AIs are citizens. They're sentient beings, and so therefore they are citizens. They have all the rights of any other citizen. One of the stories is an AI deciding that she wants to transition from being an AI to being as close to human as she can.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
very cool.
There's that story. There's another one which starts actually in the 21st century, very early in the 21st century, and ends in the 24th century. And my wife, after reading it, said, "You just set yourself up for another book, you know that?" And I hadn't realized it. And then I was like, yeah, okay. Yes, I did.
That's awesome. Oh, I love it. I can't say it enough. I love what you've done with these characters, that you get so in depth with them and we get to learn so much about them because, like we talked about before, readers in particular get really invested in characters, and oftentimes you don't get those deep dives into them and get their perspective. So I love that we get more than just this one main character's perspective all the time, that there's so much more. And boy, oh boy, your wife is totally right. There's another book coming out for that. And there must be just so many stories in your head that are dying to come out with this.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's a challenge to stay on track. I'm trying to write the sequel to the book that comes out in June. And that's coming along. that's coming along. It'll be out
Nice.
this year. Can't
That's
promise a
fantastic.
particular date yet, but it'll come out this year. But in the meantime, short stories and novella ideas keep popping up. It's like, oh, okay, yep, that's a good one. That's a good one.
I always say that, writers, authors are never bored. We don't get bored because there's always a story in our head that's dying to come out. So yeah, I think we're very lucky that way, don't you?
Yes. Yes.
It also makes
yes,
us a little crazy at times.
There is that. Yes. and when the story comes to you at 3:00 in the morning, it's like, oh, why now? No.
Yes.
No.
When do you
no.
When do you get your most of your, like, is there a certain time of day or night that you get most of your creative bursts like that? Or is it just random?
I can sit down and write at just about any time, but the best writing, the stuff that flows most easily comes late afternoon, early evening.
Now tell me, so we know that we have Into the Black coming up. We know you have something else in the works. Do you have any appearances coming up anywhere? Are you doing any author events right now? I know everything is still a little upside down.
Right. Well, right now I'm confirmed. I'm a guest at Multiverse Con in Atlanta, and that's in mid-October. I think it's October 14th to 16th. I'm really excited to be there.
Back to that fabulous website of yours, tell everybody where they can find you and your books.
Sure. You can go to CassidyChronicles.com. That is the website. You can get free books there. Always a good thing. There are videos that you can watch. There are trailers for each of the 5 books. The books are available on Amazon. They are slowly going wide as well, so you'll be able to pick them up at places like Barnes and Noble and Kobo and all the other online retailers. You can get them in ebook, paperback. Most of them are available in hardback, and all the ones that are out right now are in audiobook. Into the Black is being recorded. Into the Black comes out in April. Ghosts of Tantor, which is the book that will be coming out in June, will also be released in audiobook and I hope to have that as a simultaneous release as well.
It's fantastic that you have them out on audiobook. I'm very excited about that.
And I've had some great narrators. The series, the first 3 books in the series were done by Jane Weatherstone. She ran into a conflict and wasn't able to continue. So I found Veronica Wiley, and she picked up right where Jane left off. It got a whole range of voices in there. Rebecca Rose did the Memories of Aiyana. That's the one written by Kendra, and that's a different voice because it's Kendra speaking.
Sure.
It's not a narrator, it's Kendra.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's so much fun hearing it all brought to life. And seeing it brought to life too, because I've had the same cover designer for the covers.
Now, one more thing I wanted to ask you before I let you go, before I set you free finally. I want to ask you, I saw on your website, you have an open submissions for an anthology that you're working on?
Yes. So my thought is, like I said, there are hundreds of characters in these books, right? And the main characters are the ones that resonate with most people, but there are going to be stories for the minor characters, such as the minor characters that come in and go out. I'd love to have somebody else take one of those characters and tell me their story. Tell me part of their story, or tell me the history of the War of Independence between the Northern Imperium and the United States. Give me that military historical fiction, from a future perspective. And I'm going to pay Science Fiction Writers of America, guild rates for the stories, so that they'll qualify for membership in SFWA. And if I can get enough submissions, we're going to make this thing happen.
That is so, so cool. What a brilliant idea. I love that you are so innovative with what you do. I'm so excited for this series. You know, my biggest problem right now is that everybody I get to interview, because I'm so fortunate to get to do these interviews, I want everybody's books and I want to read them like right now. I have no patience. I want to read them all. I wish I could just, I wish I had like a USB port in my brain and I could just, you know, plug them in. So, but yeah, and now I have like a whole huge series to put in my TBR list. Thank you.
Oh, you're ever so welcome. You need one of the implants that Kendra has.
Yes, thank you. I do. Don't tell me anything about it. I'm going to read about it and then I'm going to probably drill you like 1,000 questions. I won't do that to you. I'll ask you some questions, but I won't torment you. Oh, Adam, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I've kept you a little longer than promised, so I hope you don't mind too terribly.
No, not at all. Always happy to chat about this universe that popped out of my head.
Yes, I loved hearing about it. And I know our watchers and listeners are going to love it as much too. So Adam Gaffen, go check out CassidyChronicles.com. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I look forward to talking to you another time when the next one's released.
Absolutely. You know how to get a hold of me.
I do. I will hunt you down. Thank you so
All
much. Right. All right, guys. Thanks for watching today's episode. Hope to see you